Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Silver Tempest, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we have 3 different regional results to look at. The pitchforks came out for Lugia in force, and we've seen many different ways that we can try and combat what is still the best deck in the format, no doubt. I think generally the story of these regionals has been that people pretty much just net decked the best 60s from the previous week in LAIC, and because of that, many people were capitalizing on certain aspects of the Lugia Archeops deck, which for at least Stuttgart and Toronto I know as much as it being 30% of the day one field at least, so a lot of decks capitalizing on the popularity, the polarizing nature of Lugia Archeops and how little they reacted and respected the counters and how much people wanted to target Lugia as a valid strategy, and that seems to have worked. I think as the meta narrowed, it became, can I beat Lugia with punishing either their use of all special energy or the fact that they play no switch cards for a lot of the decks here. That was kind of like the core target of Lugia. There was usual targeting of Mew, Drapions when necessary, or just have different prize maps that you can represent with just awkward one prizes and whatnot, or race them in a different way, or again catch them in the same special energy crossfire that you catch Lugia with. And then Lost Box has a few different weaknesses, most notably things like Wash Water Ice Cube in some of these water decks that we'll be looking at, Item Lock in some instances as well. These are things to bear in mind for the Lost Box decks. So when there's just a big 3, and I still think there is just a big 3 of decks here, it does make it quite easy to counter stuff, and we've seen that really nicely from the Hive Mind and a couple of very creative and spicy players. Just a quick note, you'll notice in my voice that I do have a massive cold, the classic post-tournament cold. I was at the Stuttgart Regionals myself, got top 16 with Lost Box. They haven't uploaded the list yet, but it's all on my Twitter and all that good stuff on TCG, so you can check that out if you want to. But we'll be looking at the top 8 deck lists from the 3 regions today, starting off with Brisbane. So bear with me in my voice, and I'll probably be taking sips of a hot drink over to the side of me when necessary. But let's get into it. Starting off with Tim Franklin with an Inteleon Frostmoth toolbox. It won't be the only time we see a one-prize Inteleon style deck, so pretty cool to see a few different people coming up with this strategy. The Articuno Jelly package was something that we had seen online a couple times before this weekend. We also saw an article from Alex Szymanski, and I even think Azul did a post with an Articuno Palkia list. The idea being that the Wild Freeze can paralyze. Whilst dealing 70 damage, you damage yourself for 50. So if you can Jelly up after 2 attacks, the Jelly will fully heal the Articuno. So essentially you trap, most likely, the 2-prize Lugia, V-Star in the active, or like a Stoutland as well if that's come out to play, because you have a lot of lower hit point things. You can trap that, and not only are you trapping it over a huge number of turns, because Lugia has no out to paralysis, typically, right? Or sometimes they'll play 1 Bird Keeper, but usually you can trap stuff, or at least you really hope to. You are not only getting value from the damage into the active position, you're also getting quick shooting damage in as well. And we'll even see in a later list that there's even the Radiant Alakazam in another 60 to really take full advantage of the damage that you're putting on. So Wild Freeze is a really nice way to accumulate your board and build up a ton of value and things and answers in your hand, whilst also damaging something in the active and making sure that you're ahead on the prize race. You can even sort out the math to quick shooting to then knock something out that has just been paralyzed, and then you can continue your paralysis lock on a new Pokemon that's forced into the active position as well. So thanks to the intricate math that you can do with quick shooting and Wild Freeze, I think that's another reason why the Alakazam is so good as well, is that you have that sort of option to guarantee things are getting trapped in that lock over and over again. Very cool idea. I think, for the record, this doesn't work going into future tournaments anywhere as near as well as it did going into exactly this weekend. Take nothing away from the list that we'll see this weekend. They picked the perfect moment to play a deck like this, and they've literally cashed in. Winning a regional is a lot of points and a lot of cash and a lot of kudos. So they chose the tournament to do this combo. Very, very cute, cool combo. I think it's an only natural knee-jerk that will look at some of the other Lugia lists that were prepared for cards like this. And even if we don't look at many of those lists today, I would see an expectation of Birdkeeper Eldegoss or the 1/1 Espeon package, VMAX, those sorts of things, to protect yourselves from these sorts of strategies. But as it stood, you know, the list that we were seeing from LARC, none of them had those sorts of cards in their list, so Articuno was really capitalizing there. For Mew, this deck has a Drapion one-hit KO option, and also Vulpix V-Stars Slippery Snow Star, I think it's called. Silvery Snow Star, I should say, can also quite easily one-hit KO a Mew VMAX. So I think in the other list that we see of Inteleon box, it just plays double Drapion. The Vulpix, I guess, is a little bit more versatile than a second Drapion V, so that's an interesting one. It does take a couple extra slots, but Vulpix also has upside into, for example, the Lost Box matchup, where you have Vulpix plus Wash Water, and this Snow Mirage is quite annoying, you know, preventing all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon that have an ability. I still think I prefer the Ice Cube, because when it comes down to that late game and you're trying to use Wash Water in this card, if you can't checkmate the opponent by not having any other Pokemon in play, they can do like Rope Zard plays or Rope Boss Zard or whatever, and still get through this effect. So I still think the Ice Cube is probably stronger as the option, but the Vulpix also doubles up as being like the second Drapion and whatnot. So helpful into Mew, helpful into Lost Box. Pretty cool card overall. But yeah, the one wash is kind of the thing that I'm least happy about. I think if you are truly respecting Lost Box, you probably play double wash. And again, this is something that may not work as well going into the next tournament, because I imagine, well, I'm certainly going to respect IceQ a lot more going into the next tournament as a Lost Box player. So I would like to see more than one wash. The reason being, if they find a means through one of them, you can try and rebuild another, is kind of my idea here. And of course you have Frostmoth in this list, so you can try and like build up an IceQ all in one go again, perhaps. But I guess you are trying to checkmate them by only having one Pokemon in play regardless, so not really too sure. I think in general double wash would be pretty welcome here. I don't think the Frostmoth isn't all that necessary, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of surplus to requirements. So it would be something that we look at later with the other list of Inteleon Toolbox that I think gets the job done that little bit better. Nonetheless, really cool combination, seeing the one prize attacking threats of Greninja being used here quite nicely, with the Frostmoth, of course, also being a problem for Lost Box, just racing them, I guess you could say. You can race quite well with Greninja and Inteleons when need be, so you're not all in on this IceQ package, I guess. So you are quite versatile in what you're good against, which is pretty nice to see. And yeah, you have an easy map into Mew, an easy map into Lugias of this weekend, and enough answers to Lost Box that you can be annoying into the big three. So you can see how it did so well. Then we have Joel playing another paralyzing Pokemon, the Zekrom. Really cool combo again here is that you can hit things down to the 20 hit points remaining. Lugias, you can hit them for 260. There are 3 Serenas, 2 Boss, and a Rope to try and push them back and Terra Spark finish them off. Or you also have the Zapdos that increases your damage output all the way up to that 280 without the need of a choice belt either. So you can see why there's no damage buff tools. You can cleanly KO over the Zekrom if you want to, or you can try and Paralysis Trap and move into a Terra Spark, finishing things off on the bench whilst also putting damage onto other Pokemon, which is also very cool. So yeah, very scary for Lugia players, no doubt about it. Also has the Medicham combo as well, which works with the Wild Shock, where you can hit them for 260, Yoga Loop to gain that additional turn. So there's all sorts of ways that you're trying to punish exactly Lugia, which is nice. Even has a Raikou in here as well, so you're like tripling down on trying to beat Lugia, I guess you could say. Raikou gives you access to higher base damage output in other matchups, of course, as well. As does the Snorlax, just having that high damage threshold and the unfazed fat to be annoying for Lost Box, I guess is the idea here. I think you are lacking switch cards to make this Snorlax a huge threat, but possibly if you're just like ballooning your Snorlax and retreating between them whilst Dynamotoring to like 2 and you just get them both out and they're doing stuff, it could be annoying for Lost Box. But I don't like that you don't play like Birdkeeper here, or just more switches over nets in this instance to try and make more of your Snorlax into the Lost Box matchup. Maybe I'm being a little naive of it, but I think it could still be pretty rough. Maybe just because you're also a one-prize deck, you don't need to buy that many turns with the Lax to actually do things right. But as soon as I see a Snorlax sleeping, I'm trying to weave in my Sableye as quickly as possible and punish. But maybe just like Aleki being annoying for Lost Box and other stuff like that could be good enough. Pretty crazy to see this deck doing so well, though. Especially, it feels like it should have a pretty weak Mew in my eyes. That's the thing that I'm like most afraid of. Possibly, again, it's the fact that there's a lot of Mews that are playing Switch Cart rather than Switch. That punishes them so hard with Paralysis actually sticking a good amount of time, so you can Wild Shock into Thump in the Mew matchup as well. So yeah, maybe exactly because Mew lists are not playing physical Switch, they're really getting punished right now. All of these things, by the way, Paralysis, it's had its sunlight, it's had its day in the sun, so I think now people will be, reverting those tech cards to have answers to Paralysis. The craziest thing of the weekend was Durant, by the way. Finally making that top 8 placement. Been around for a long time, been that sort of online meme for the longest time. I'll still never know how it got this placement, honestly. There's nothing about this Durant list that makes me think, wow, it's perfect. It has the answers that it needed all this time. Yeah, I mean, it's trying to buy the Yellowhorn turns. It always could have done that. It's got the capes and the nets to try and have some healing against Lost Box and make it a little bit awkward for them to, chain one prize knockouts in time. It has Yveltal, which is clearly, a good idea against Lugia and slowing them down. You've got the Sydney in here as well. Just one Serena in the deck. But plenty of gears to try and get there. You have Venusaur as that sort of end turn engine, a little mini thing going on there, and has synergy with Peony to top yourself back up on cards, and the Rose Towers, of course, doing a similar thing here. So a cool engine, probably worked quite hard on the list. I believe their Twitter mentioned that they'd had coaching with Azul on the list. I don't want to say Azul's taking your money, but if I was getting coaching, I'd ask for different decks than Durant, but fair play to you. There you go. We have a Yveltal control from Lewis in top 4, so a lot of control doing very well this weekend. This is pretty much just Sanders' list from the previous week in LAIC. Can't really blame them. Again, if the Lugias aren't going to react, then why should you change a thing? And it looks like this is just very similar to Sanders' list. Not quite the exact same 60, but nonetheless pretty close. And yeah, it's a strong deck. As we know, it has the answers to the things. And has a very favourable Lugia, which is nice. We see our first Lugia. And it's from Brent, playing the double collapse, double vacuum. Everything else is just very standard about the list. Choosing to not play Dunsparce and just playing 3 Archeops always makes me sad. I'm fine with the no Dunsparce, but yeah, the triple Archeops is just so bad. Otherwise, we're at 16 energy, which is 1 more than Tord, which is always a nice thing to have, I guess. Just some peace of mind that you just have more energy at your disposal. And yeah, a few more answers to Path. So it doesn't play Pumpkin either, so it actually has less answers to physical Path. So I guess they're just expecting lots of Mirror and not Path. Risky. Very risky. There you go. But yeah, we don't have lists for Mew and Lugia, but not a really big deal. And then we have another control, which is again a Sander concoction from the LAIC, doing pretty well over in Brisbane. So 3 control decks, I guess you could say. One's an active mill deck, 2 are actual control decks. And then our finalist decks both utilizing Paralysis as a means of stealing turns from certainly Lugia and sometimes even Mew as well. Very spicy. Notably, there were still a number of Lugias on very strong records in the top 16. So it looks like a lot of the top brass players that you normally expect in this top 8, to take nothing away from the other players, all picked Lugia again, which is fair because they probably travelled for like 30 hours getting home from the LAIC and then just had to sleeve up their decks again. So no surprise they didn't make too many changes. On to Stuttgart then. So I was at this tournament. Made top 16 with Lost Box. Only lost one game, and it was to Magnus, who made top 4 with his Palkia. I'll go into more detail about my run another day. Today we'll just look at the top 8. And it was won by Mateus with the Palkia Vikavolt deck. Now, this is a Polish concoction that also made top 8 at the Warsaw Regional Championships. I kind of wrote it off as just a meta call for the previous format, but now that I look at it more and more, especially looking back at the final as well, which I've now watched, I feel this deck is really strong and one of the most underrated decks in the game. Very strong at its core, just a lot of draw. It has concealed cards and speed lightning, which is a great combination to help you cycle and gain more cards. Has Mysterious Tail, Shoes, and VIP Pass, so builds a board quickly. Has that Melanie, which just helps you keep throwing that hand over and over again. And really, Lugia plays Fish and 2 Marnie. There are some Mew builds that plays like a Roxanne and Marnies, but a lot of Mews don't play any hand disruption at all. Lost Box plays no hand disruption most of the time. So you really get away with a lot with a deck like this. It just gets to sit on a crazy hand, and it really helps you when you're trying to have these cross-switcher combos and all this other stuff. And I actually have played a little bit with Turbo Palkia in the past, just not quite the Lightning package as well. But Vikavolt just helps you beat all this new nonsense as well, all these decks that we've just seen, like the Inteleon Toolbox and the Flaffy Box. Vikavolt will be a nightmare for those sorts of decks, I think, because it really just stops them getting set up and in the game. I think stopping Lugia getting set up in the game is a big part of this deck's win condition, because it doesn't look that strong into Lugia actually on paper, although Mateus did show their matchup spread and they were very positive into Lugia. I think they beat 2 and tied 1. And they were also pretty favoured into Mew, and again, on paper, it doesn't look all that strong, but with the boss quad cross switcher, oftentimes it's trying to just take a 2/2/2 prize map in a very quick succession whilst leaving a Mew or another 1 prize Pokemon in the active position. So if you've gone second into that, if you've gone second into a DT Mew or even a Fusion Mew, I think you're a little bit unfavoured. I think if you go first into it, you're absolutely fine. I think a Drapion would give me a little bit more comfort in the matchup, but it's something I'll probably look at. I think it's pretty okay into Lugia. Kind of just relies that the early Paralyzing Bolts cheese just stops them getting their optimal setup a lot of the time. I can see that working, honestly, for how slow Lugia's turn 1s can be, especially without Supporter. So if you choose to go second into the Lugia matchup, it might actually be pretty strong for how reliably you can actually get your turn 1 Supporter attack off with a list like this that's so simplistic and has so many 4-ofs and so much cycle. And having that Palkia backup gives you the Star Portal 1 prize attacking option in Greninja, and gives you some extra beat stick potential with Subspace Swell to help you see through those 2 prizes as well. So yeah, I can see this being a really strong deck, honestly. Has a lot of answers to a lot of things, has a ton of energy recursion, so it must be a huge headache for the controlling decks. Even though it plays special energy, it plays enough basic energy to still be okay. It has item lock as well. So I think this is just like a really scary deck, and obviously item lock is terrible for Lost Box. Like, you've always hated the Vikavolt matchup, especially with Greninja that can take Moonlight Shuriken prizes. It has Zig Quad Net to make the most out of the Vikavolt. It can just do so much. So I think this should be a deck in the metagame. It's no longer just going to be this small contingent of Polish players playing it. I think there's massive reasons to really like the deck, and it's amazing that it's been that sort of kept secret just because it was played in the last deck of a format and necessarily didn't look like it carried over, despite it being a Lightning deck. We never really saw the Vikavolt Aleki kicking off against the Lugia so much, but the Vikavolt list here is much more consistent because it doesn't have all this Aleki nonsense trying to get those into play. It just focuses on getting that lock as quickly as possible. There was a lot of Mew in top 8. There was a lot of Mew in general in Stuttgart. I faced 5, I think. I could have faced 6 even, but I ID'd my last round. Or possibly that was my 5th. So Lugia was out in droves. So Brent was playing the fusion build of Mew. With those catches in there, just do the thing. Try and have those high rolls, and it works a lot of the time. Very scary deck, the Fusion Mew. I still think it keeps everything honest. And the Fusion Mew is a slightly better time into the Yveltal guff, basically, especially with the Silene that was being played. There's also a quad DTE based Mew with the Paths and the heavy Marnie Roxanne. Also came up against a number of these and they were very, very strong. And quite a worry to deal with, honestly. Even has the Heroes Medal here to try and deny some easy maps into the 3 prizes and still try and force an awkward time out of, Drapion, Tex and stuff like that. So a very cool list here as well, embracing the 1 Serena for the extra draw supporter, why not? Has the heavy Vacuum with the Path package, but also plays Lost City as well, so a lot of the time we just see Path only in this hand disruption based build of Mew, but playing triple Vacuum and 2 Lost City still gives you that defense in the Lost box as well, so you're not completely dead in the water there, so that's a really nice adaptation from Yari, friend of the channel as well, so good for them for a really sick result. Magnus, my only loss. He checkmated me turn 2, game 1, by attaching turn 1 a wash to Ice Cube, then turn 2 Candy and Teleon double net, right hand attach, and block face, which was quite funny. So the double wash Ice Cube package does work to an extent, although my list was completely untech'd for Ice Cube, so certainly did the job there. Has the Jelly Kuno package, a bit of a smaller package than some of the other lists we'll see later, but certainly still puts a lot of work in here. Has Drapion as well as Palkia, so you can see quite naturally how that has a good time into Mew as well. Has the double quick shooting, so again trying to capitalize on that paralysis as much as possible. That's why we see the Candy in here, so looks like players are really trying to capitalize on that wild freeze. Again, don't know how well it works in future, but it would have worked wonders this weekend, I think, no doubt. I think Magnus was farming some of the higher end Lugia players on the day. Reverting away from a heavy VIP pass definitely makes a ton of sense because you're not trying to go double Palkia early in a lot of matchups. You can rely on keep calling so much more. It's basically just an attacking Inteleon deck a lot of the time and just weaving in other attackers. So yeah, really just a package deal here where you have the Articuno and the Inteleon part of the deck against the Lugia, you have the Drapion and the Palkia part of the deck against Mew, you have the Ice Cube Wash package against Lost Box. So you can see how it gets things done, to be honest. A very strong deck again from Magnus. And Palkia really shouldn't have vanished off the face of the earth. But because it did, it made the Jelly combo so much more powerful this weekend that it probably helped overall. Now that it's back, it's probably a lot worse into Lugia. We unfortunately don't have a Liliana's Lugia, which is a shame, but yeah, well done to them and the only Lugia in this top 8. Sander came with a new invention, and this is much more of a harebrained scheme from Sander. Honestly, obviously he's a teammate of mine, so we spoke about this, and this is one of his least prepared for tournaments because obviously he did so well at the IC that he had to have a knee jerk because he was expecting more Lugias to be aware of his tactics and wanting to change things up. So reverted back to some walling with Mewtwo v Union, which as a card or as 4 cards had a really great weekend, as we'll look at Toronto in a moment. And this time it's quite an aggressive approach where you have the Life Shaker Gengar allowing you to move counters from your Pokemon, your Psychic to your other Psychic, and obviously you're playing lots of Psychic Mons here. You have Radiant Serena to heal. It's like a fresh water set effect, which is really funny. And you have nets as well, so you can move a ton off onto stuff and then net them up. The cool thing about the Gardevoir line is that you can use Refinement a bunch, then evolve into your Guardi, get your +2 from Shining Arcana, move damage onto the Guardi, net up the Guardi, put it onto your next trade mon, so you end up drawing a shed ton of cards whilst healing, and the main reason you're healing is so that you can actually attack aggressively with Mewtwo. So yeah, Sander was actually taking prizes this weekend. You can obviously sit back and use your healing from the Mewtwo itself when you want to, and that is a way to win certain matchups, like you have the double Silene, double pad, so you're pretty safe to deck things out if you need to. And you will sit there behind your Mewtwo while you're building your combo sometimes, but once you get Gengar up, you can just move your damage onto other things and then go, okay, it's time to Psysplosion or Final Burn, because you can't touch me because I'm a V-guarded Mewtwo, and it's just too big for most decks in format. So a pretty cool combination. And Mewtwo's just this really annoying card. Also really annoying for other controlling decks to deal with this card, because you have inbuilt like energy recovery, so you're never going to run out the Mewtwo player, and you're going to be the one able to hit them a lot more often. So it's going to come down to random like yell and stuff and other things like that. So yeah, very cool deck from Sander. He said it wasn't completely refined, and there probably are cards in the list that he would have changed. Like, for example, Bruno, he said was abysmal and should have just been Marnie in every world. And there were maybe a few other cards that he also didn't think quite fit perfectly, but overall really cool list, and he was really happy with being able to show off Gengar, which is a card that he's like had earmarked since its release, and finally had a combination that he could use it with. So yeah, really cool. We have Piotr playing Lost Box. They've been playing Lost Box for a hot minute. They've played it at a few tournaments, and this time it's a gate build with Charizard, which I personally think is a little bit greedy, to be honest. I prefer my build of the Charizard Snorlax combo with no gates. Just play Raihan and Twins. I think that works a lot better. I think the gate builds that I prefer to look at will be the ones in Toronto. Regardless, this is playing the double belt. It's playing 1 Lax, 1 Zeraora to try and target stuff down. It is playing a Temple of Sinnoh to try and deal with Wash Water, which I guess is something that I should have done. But yeah, for me, this feels like so fluffy and a little bit greedy to have this much energy and gates, and like still trying to play Clara because you're Charizard, but then also shoving in 1 Rod because you're Mirage Gates. It just gets so cloggy and messy for me. I think it's not the right way to build this deck. I think if you're playing Gates, you stick to Greninja. If you're playing Zard, stick to Twin Raihan. I mean, I know they had a better finish than me, but it's circumstantial. So it just doesn't feel right to play Gates and not Greninja. Greninja just helps you cycle the deck enough to make it happen against Lugia, because otherwise you need to have an instant response. Not only do you need to find belts for either your Zeraora or your Snorlax, but you already need to be at 7 things in the lost zone to be able to deal with Stoutland on the spot, and I just don't think that happens enough. Whereas if you play Basin Twin Energy, or if you play Raihan Twin, you can just make that happen so much more with your Zard and your Lax. We finish off with Jamie with another fusion build of Mew with a pretty interesting split of stadiums. Has the cave in here respecting Lost Box, which I think is kind of cool. Has Silene, which is definitely going to be a valuable card. So this is like an old school DTE Mew with just the 1 Marnie in here. Oh, sorry, it's not a DTE Mew at all. It's a Sparkle build, but it does have a disruptive Marnie, which I guess is something you don't always expect in the list. So it's kind of like a hybrid build, I guess you could say. Has a lot going on here. But yeah, great result as well for them. Let's finish off with Toronto then. Thanks for putting up with my voice. This cold is dreadful. Congratulations to Piper with another regional win. Crazy achievement. And it's with Mewtwo v Union Control this time. Nothing too crazy about the list. The Radiant Gardevoirs are nice include to make you that much more tanky, especially with that V-Guard as well. Has the Misfortune Assistance as well as Sydney to try and attack the hand and their deck, try and remove some resources. Has the Heavy Hammer and the Yell Horn. Doesn't play any tools, which is kind of interesting. I guess it expects Lugia and Lost Box to play vacuums anyway, so just don't commit space to tools. Is a reasonable prospect. But yeah, it looks like a very reasonable 60. Nothing really that looks out of place for Mewtwo v Union Control. I do think Mewtwo's a bit of a weird spot. It's really bad into Charizard Lost Boxes because they can attach to Drapion pretty aggressively, and you really need to go crazy on your Crushing Hammers before they have a Drapion that can just announce attacks against you, and then it just gets unwinnable. But I guess it's benefiting from most of the Lost Boxes being Greninja Gate, and the Greninja Gate builds, because they play Kyogre, they don't need to play Drapion. So you're only bad against like maybe half or sub-half the Lost Boxes, which does make it a bit of a dodge and weave for how popular Lost Box is. It's probably solidly like the third, fourth most popular deck if you split them up. But I think other than that, you're pretty solid. Obviously, the Craft Destruction plus Hammers plus Sydney and Flannery are going to be really good into Mew and really good into Lugia to slow them down. You only need to hit a few powerfuls with like any of those combinations to allow the Mewtwo to tank in every aspect. So, yeah, pretty solid other than a shaky Lost Box that plays Drapion. I'm going to attach to it. One of my ties was to a Mewtwo v Union, just anecdotally here, and I won the first game with 25 minutes left on the clock, and I thought I literally couldn't lose, but I led a cram and all my switch cards for like 6 turns, so I allowed them to get to the bottom of the deck before I could attach any energy to my Drapion, so that's how I ended up losing, which is really sad. But yeah, it's a big risk to play Mewtwo v Union if you expect Charizard builds of Lost Box. Other than that, really, really strong deck. We don't have Christian's list of Arcdura, unfortunately, but Arcdura can't really change its stripes too much. I don't think there's anything special about the list that I saw from the finals. So, yeah, well done. Arcdura keeps Lugia honest, keeps them committing deck space to Jammers or Lost Vacuums, which I don't think many of them want to, because we want space for other things. And I think Arcdura sees like little enough play that people put it low on their priority list of things to care about, and that's kind of why it succeeds every now and then. And the second place finishes are obviously great results. So well done to Arcdura. I think players will continue to not respect you, continue to not play you, but that's exactly where you want to be if you're the person playing the deck, to be honest. Caleb and a few of the other team members played this deck. Grant as well, with that 7th place finish, will bunch them into one. There was 4 of them on the winning end, and they all played each other. So without that, there could have been possibly even more of this exact 60 in cut. So clearly a refined list from Grant's and Azul's list from the previous week in LAIC. Really happy to see the Zekrom come in over the Raikou. I think it makes a ton more sense. They also doubled up to 2 belts, which I think is pretty important for their Snorlax play into Stoutland. But of course, they can also have a Zekrom play into Stoutland as well, if need be, because then that can follow up into a Greninja play or a Sable play, if need be. Even worse comes to worst, you can go into a Cram play after that, but you're normally trying to plus on your paralysis a lot of the time. Like, you're trying to leave stuff there so you can lead into damage with your other stuff. That's kind of the idea. Moved away from the Clara, added a Bird Keeper for extra dig and just draw. But has the double rod, double recycler, so really trying to capitalize on that Aqua Storm, which is still a massive play into the Mew matchup. Can see how this is reasonable into the mirror as well, because you force things like Manaphy into play. You can Lost Mine it constantly for additional value. It still has a ton of those switching outs that you require. It's slightly light on them, but it has that Greninja draw engine at the same time to help you out. So, yeah. Very strong list. I think a bit more refined from the LAIC list. I think that they did admit that themselves. But they've got it in a really good place, and I don't see a reason to change this deck too much. The paralysis from Zekrom gets a little bit weaker, perhaps, but you're already playing Belt anyway, so if you're just using it as a Lightning Chap, possibly this could turn into Zeraora as the one prize attacking Mon, but the core is still there, right? So, yeah, still a really, really solid 60. Even adding a Zeraora in addition to the Zekrom could be cool once you've scouted lists. There were some Lugias still doing well at this tournament. And our top 4 list is looking pretty straightforward here. Is playing a Bird Keeper, which I think was a really smart play for the weekend. Is playing a decent chunk of energy here with the V-Guard and the Twin coming in as well. Is playing 1 Snorlax, which can be a little bit more frustrating for Lost Box than its other one prize attackers. Only playing the 1 Bird Keeper makes it a little bit risky to me, but seems reasonable enough. The 3-2 Lugia line I'm not too high on, especially with only 3 captures. I don't mind the 4-2 line. Still makes me a little bit nervous, but we know now that we really don't want... Like, we're living in such a one-prizey world. Like, unless you're against exactly Mew, but even then you want to use your one-prize stuff. that you only want to get one Lugia out in most instances. It kind of makes me think that V-Guard is much worse as well, but I know you can do some cool stuff to stop the fish bouncing into your guys, so I don't know, it looks like it is going to be thinner Lugia packages from here on out, and it kind of makes sense into the builds we're seeing. Bradna also had a very strong showing with Lugia, with finally the 4 Archeops. They've seen the lights, love to see it. Continuing with the gift energy though, which is interesting, and continuing with their 3-3 split of Research and Marnie. So one of the higher end of Marnies, I think that's a big question mark for the format in terms of where it goes, how much Marnie's being played, because there's a lot of lists right now that are quite wombo combo-y and a little bit shaky on consistency that I think Marnie can trample them sometimes. And I definitely fear Marnie as a Lost Box player, because Marnie plus Stoutland is just hell for you. So I don't hate the high count of Marnie at all. Eating into the research count is what scares me, because it's such a big card for the deck. But the real big talking point of Bradna and their team's list this time around is the 1-1 Espeon VMAX. This just turns your deck into, like, I'm not dealing with nonsense deck, which is obviously very nice. And another reason why I think the paralysis stuff and possibly some controlling stuff has a much worse time these days into Lugia is that you now have the no-nonsense package of the Espeon to just say, no, your effects don't work to me, let me just hit through you with my stuff and out-trade you. So pretty cool to see. I think a lot of people will pick up this 60, and I don't see a reason to not, to be honest. I think it's really, really strong. The triple belt is still quite high. I know they were super high on it previously, but that was when they played Raikou, so I don't know if this is just like a ghost from Raikou still being in their deck list. It doesn't allow you to ration your powerfuls, so I do understand why, but I still feel like 2 is like a pretty solid count most of the time. And the gift is another interesting thing that they're continuing to use. So clearly they like it. But yeah, I think they got so much more right with this 60 than their one for LAIC. So they took what they learned from the previous weekend and made their list so much better. The meme, Jake Gearhart made top 8. Yeah, I mean, after all of his tweets, he just played pretty much a standard Palkia that we'd seen already in online tournaments. So, I mean, if you want to give him credit for being the galaxiest, brainest 15 counters to Lugia, haha, I did it, like, cool. But he just played a standard Palkia with, like, 1 jelly. And this was already a thing in Japan for, like, the longest time. Like, he played Thornton, but he always played Thornton with Palkia, because he always does. But yeah, I think, honestly, to not rag on him too much, because it's just too easy, he's always been a proponent of Lost City, and it does make life more awkward for Lost Box. I think without Ice Cube, you're still quite bad into Lost Box unless you commit to more Lost Cities, honestly. The double right hand's really cool with the Articuno players. If you're already playing double right hand, why wouldn't you play Ice Cube? So weird. But yeah, similar to Magnus, plays the double quick shooting to make the most out of Wild Freeze, which is nice. I think the heavy VIP pass, like I said, with Magnus is kind of the wrong attitude to take. But regardless, I think Paralysis is just way worse going ahead. Again, he picked his tournament for it. Good for him. His 1 of 50 counters did seem to work in the field. He picked the right one. Let's see how he does in the next one with a new counter that has to not be based on the effect of an attack, essentially, which is a much harder thing to do, so good luck. We've already looked at Grant 60, but again, crazy run recently. He's obviously a very strong player and very accomplished with Lost Box now, which is one of the harder decks to play with a lot of decisions. We finish off with Charlie Lockyer. I think alongside Magnus's list, I like this one a lot as well. I think it's between those two that I like the most. Again, they have to adapt. All the reasons why they were good are going to not work going into the next tournament, but you have to appreciate the deck in the time capsule that it was in, and it was completely spot on with a very high Articuno, the very high Jelly, the double wash, which I was really gunning for. And instead of playing 2 Inteleon, you lose out on a lot of draw by not playing Radiant Greninja, but you do gain a lot of power by playing Radiant Alakazam and spoonfulling other stuff by moving the counters around and essentially keeping things paralyzed, right, is the idea. Because you play so many Jelly, and even the backup to get back more Jelly, you can continually just hit for 50, essentially, with your Wild Freeze, and keep spooning things onto the bench as well, and keeping one thing trapped for as long as possible. It's an absolute troll. It's hilarious, but it seems to work. I actually do think I prefer Greninja and second quick shooting because it's probably just stronger, especially into like Lost Box and stuff. Even though you can try and go solo block face. But yeah, I think solid list. The double Drapion is just like, I can't even be bothered to think about Mew. Let's just double drape you. And I guess that's the only part of the deck that still works going forward, because I don't think this works into Lost Box or Lugia anymore. But it worked for this tournament, and again, props for an awesome deck list. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of knee-jerk reacting in the format. We're going to start seeing Lugias get pretty weird. I think Bradner's is the most easy copy-paste Lugia going forward, because it has the no-nonsenseness of Espeon. I think just looking at this, the things I question are like Third Belt, Gift, Guard. These are like the cards that I question, but this is a really good 60 to use as your base. Like I said, I like High Marnie. It's really good at beating the nonsense and makes Lost Box closer. Even with Stoutland, I still think it's close now that the Lost Boxes have instant responses to Stoutland. So I think that's going to be really important going forward. I think Mewtwo is not in the worst place, but much worse when your Yveltors aren't working against Lugia. They still need to ration correctly, but it should be way harder for Lugia. Sorry, for Mewtwo going ahead, especially because it's also can be quite awkward into some Lost Boxes that play Drapion, which I think could be more the case as Lost Box changes. A lot of these great jelly decks, like Take a Bow, you chose the right tournament, but I don't think it works in future. That's basically my takes. I also really like the Palkia Vikavolt deck. I think it's something I'm going to put a lot more time into. Thanks for sticking with me, listening to my voice break a ton of times, and yeah, I'll be back tomorrow, probably with a tournament report, and then we'll be getting into some of these deck lists. Annoyingly, a lot of the lists that did well, I can't play into today's ladder because they just won't work as well. But we'll be doing updates of all sorts of the top decks and seeing how everything shakes up now that there's been some new contenders added. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.